In my early 20s, I worked at Denny's as a hostess, and every day I would have to ring people out and hand them their change. I remember one shift we ran out of $1 bills, and before we could send someone to the bank, I had a customer who needed $2 in change. Because we were out of dollar bills, I gave him two options. Either I could give him $2 in quarters, or I could give him this. Hi, I'm Zaylee, and today I'd like to talk about weird US currency because while my customer did end up taking the $2 bill, at first he didn't think it was real. And I mean, it doesn't seem real, right? Like, what purpose does it really serve? I think most Americans do know that $2 bills exist, but it's not something we really encounter very frequently, so it's pretty easy to forget that $2 bills are in fact real, valid currency. Interestingly enough, it is far from the only weird, rare US currency that is still completely valid, and some of which could hypothetically be used to buy something. There are at least 5 other valid bills that you've probably never heard of. The first is the $500 bill with President William McKinley on the front. Originally, it was printed in 1945 and it was discontinued in 1969, but just because they stopped printing them, that doesn't mean you couldn't pay for your groceries with one, assuming your cashier even believes it's actually real. Of course, you'd have to get your hands on one first, which is not an easy task. Most are in the hands of collectors, and they were willing to pay double the face value of the bill just to put those in their collection. Originally, the $1,000 bill had Alexander Hamilton's face on it, and you may or may not see the problem with this. Nowadays, you can find Hamilton's face on the $10 bill, and it was also on the $10 bill when the first $1,000 bills were being printed. While in plenty of other countries, they have maybe only like 1 or 2 faces on their bills, we like to mix things up here and have a different face on each denomination of bill. Since Hamilton was already on the 10, the $1,000 bill was changed to President Grover Cleveland. Much like the $500 bill, and in what will be a running theme, the bill was discontinued in 1969. James Madison, the 4th President of the United States, is on the $5,000 bill, and it was first printed during the Civil War. Like the two before it, and the next one I'll be talking about, the $5,000 bill was discontinued in 1969. The reason it and others were discontinued is because President Richard Nixon was worried that criminals would use the larger bills in money laundering. And if I'm being honest, I don't really understand how the bills being bigger would help with money laundering, but apparently it was enough of a concern that they stopped printing them. The man on the $10,000 bill, one Salmon P. Chase, is one of the few non-presidents you can find on American money. Much like Hamilton, he was the Secretary of the Treasury, though he served under Abraham Lincoln. He wasn't just Secretary of the Treasury, though, as at different points in time, he also held the positions of Ohio Senator, Ohio Governor, and Supreme Court Justice. While serving as the Secretary of the Treasury, it was his idea to move the United States from a primarily coin-based currency system to a primarily paper-based currency system. And his face was on many of the first bills, including the first $1 bills. Another fun fact is that while Chase Bank is not actually affiliated with him, they did name themselves after him, and what is wild to me is that is not the reason people know who he is. Apparently, people know who he is because of the $10,000 bill, and I find that hard to believe because I've known that Chase Bank exists for years, but it's only relatively recently that I found out that the $10,000 bill was like a thing. The last bill on our list is not one you'll ever be able to own since it was never put into circulation for public use and can't actually be legally owned by collectors. The $100,000 bill featuring Woodrow Wilson was printed in 1934 during the Great Depression and was meant for moving money between different Federal Reserve banks. These banks still hold the majority of them, but a few are displayed in various museums such as the Museum of American Finance and the Smithsonian. When I first learned about the last bill on the list, it reminded me of the $1 trillion bill that Mr. Burns has in that one episode of The Simpsons, because it just felt too big for it to make sense for it to exist, But I guess apparently now a $1 trillion coin might end up being a real thing. I'm going to be honest, I don't really understand why, because it feels like a very made up solution to the problem it's supposed to solve. And the only reason it would work is because money as a whole is just kind of made up and can be whatever we want it to be. It just feels very symbolic, and whatever it's supposed to be doing to help could just be done without making a physical coin. But I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on the economy. I'm just a person who got a kick out of learning about weird money, and I wanted to share, so I hope you enjoyed learning about weird US currency, because I had a lot of fun researching this one. I actually work at a bank, so I feel like I end up learning a lot of little things about money during the annual trainings I have to do, and then when the training doesn't specify about things that I think are interesting, I'll just end up going down research rabbit holes. I went down one recently about how banking works when you sell weed legally, because apparently it is a nightmare. So I might end up making a video about that, and if that sounds up your alley, definitely consider hitting subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching.